everybody. We're here in studio with the Richard Listen Show, where we feature high performers from a variety of realms and their stories on how they've made it to the platforms they've arrived at and how they use the work they do to inspire others. Today, we have an exciting guest. Feel like we've been having this show for many months as we've been building up and trying to find out where in the world is Dr. Christina Heilman. It's like where in the world is Carmen Sandiego, a game I played as a kid. She is a sports psychologist, and she has a program called Mindset. She'll tell you a little bit about the book she's written, the work she's doing. She's an author. She's a speaker. I've seen her speak. She is animated. She captivates the room. She's inspired me to continue with the work I'm doing here in California, and hopefully will help inspire other students to seek the field of sports psychology and continue expanding into a variety of realms. Just in the last few weeks, we've had musicians. We've had others who use music to help people cope with grief. We've had dentists who work with athletes. So I thank you so much. The connections that keep coming in through Instagram and LinkedIn, and people inviting me on their shows. So that'll be released shortly. Also, congratulations to Impact Dental Designs and our friend Doc Sarowitz, who they've been making a mark with a friendly mouth guard for athletes, including MMA fighters, hockey players, football players. So if you're a parent with a youth athlete out there, please check out Impact Dental Designs and see if those mouth guards can protect your young athlete. So without further ado, it's been an exciting time for Richard Listens. Thanks again to our former guests, George Kahn and Mr. Bill Protzman. George Kahn will be doing a fundraiser for Path for the Homeless coming up in September, so please check out Mr. George Kahn and his jazz work going forward. That's the beauty of the show, not only the people I meet, but the connections that I'm able to make from just being here. It's all happening. It's all the process of manifestation of a lot of hard work. So thank you to all those involved, and I'm excited to see the flow of where it develops. So today's conversation will focus on Dr. Christina Heilman, her work on her company Mindset, and she works closely. My particular interest is how she helps athletes, CEOs, as well as those who do mountain climbing and a lot of the sports that I have absolutely zero training in, but have become really popular in the public eye in the last year, at least through local film. She lives in the Tetons with her husband, son, and she has a passion for learning new things. So she is the author of Elevate Your Excellence, the Mindset and Methods That Make Champions. So without further ado, we welcome into the studio today, Dr. Christina Heilman.
Hello, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you with your patience, and I'm glad that we could finally get you on the show.
Yeah, no problem. These glitches happen, like you couldn't find me, I couldn't find you, but here we are today.
Yeah, so I mean, probably this is not new for you. I know on Saturday, just here in Century City, they were going to have, I think the directors and cameramen from Free Solo were here. How much of this is trending now, and how much of this has been work that has been going on for a decade with free climbers and climbing? What can you tell us about this new phenomenon?
I don't know if it's a phenomenon, because it's been part of my world for 20 years. So I'm interested to hear how you think it's a phenomenon, because this has been my world for a while. And so there's free solo out, and now, climbing is an Olympic sport. It soon will be coming here in the next couple of years. So yeah, I think it's just kind of the normal progression of a sport.
Interesting. So let's start, with the beginning. I was amazed by your journey. How did you arrive at this place in your career? Because so many people are like, always trying to figure out, how do I get to this place of passion? How do I arrive in working with those I want to work with? And I was amazed by, at least when you shared the story in the California Psych Association conference in front of those professionals there, how it seems to have this organic flow for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what can you share about your process, kind of from the beginnings, the touchstones of how you began in mental skills?
Yeah, we met at the California Psychological Association, and I did two talks there. One was a 12-minute introductory talk, and then the 90-minute sports psychology talk. And what was interesting is that in that 12-minute talk, which was really hard for me to come up with, it actually took me a way longer time than the 90-minute talk. But
Oh, that's interesting.
that title was Joy Drives Excellence. And it was just through brainstorming through this process that got me to working with rock climbers. And so a little bit of my story is I grew up in South Dakota. You can think of Little House on the Prairie and the rolling plains. And because there wasn't a lot to do there, I found sport as an avenue to like push my limits, discover like the depths and limits of who I am, and as well as like discover strengths I didn't know I had. And a gymnastics injury left me pretty devastated. The doctor I went to said I'd never be able to do gymnastics again, and I really had this like I don't know what to do with my life, like a loss of identity at the age of 16. And I went through that process, frustrated, mad, angry, at 16, like my whole world ended. And later that season, I did a lot of my rehab, and later that season, I ended up doing gymnastics later that year. So my first career path was being an athletic trainer. So helping athletes overcome their injuries, like how do you help them tape their ankles as well as get them out the door. And so I was doing that, but what I really found was that my gift wasn't doing these physical rehab exercises. My gift was helping them mentally, emotionally overcome these hardships, just like I had done. And so it was really, how do I help them return back to play confidently? How do I help them stay motivated during rehab? And I also noticed, like, wow, these athletes have one leg to stand on, and it's the physical leg. And as soon as that got injured or broken, they had no other legs to stand on. And I was like, why? They're athletes. Why don't they have more coping skills? I just don't get it. And so I just started diving into that, as well as like I also started rock climbing at that time in my 20s, and my 20s were slipping away. I was working 60 to 80 hours a week. This is not like the American dream that I had hoped for. And so I decided to quit my career. And I moved to Joshua Tree to climb, and then to the Tetons to ski patrol. And then I went back to school and got my degree, my PhD in sports psychology. And it was really frustrating at first because I'd never had any classes in sports psychology, and now I just like dived right in, and I'm decided I'm going to get a PhD in it. But I worked really hard and I fell in love with it. I finished in 4 years, and my research in positive youth development through sport won the Dissertation of the Year award at the Association for Applied Sports Psychology.
That's incredible.
So yeah, I was actually really psyched about that. Like, I was like, what's motivation? Like, I know what it is in my heart, but in my head, there's a concept term about this. Like, and so just really diving in. Yeah. And then I fell in love with the Tetons and a boy. So I moved back up here to get married, start a family, and also start a business. And I worked in collegiate athletics for my athletic training career, so that's who I set out to work with, because that's what I was familiar with professionally. Personally, I had this, aspiration of climbing and skiing and all these mountain sports. And so as I was starting my business, I got a call from my mentor, my PhD, and she said, hey, Black Diamond, which is a outdoor equipment company, is doing this project. They need a sports psychologist. I thought of you. Like, they contacted me, but I thought you would be perfect. So I started working with pro climbers right out of the gate, which was really fascinating. And so So that's the joy drives excellence. It's like, oh, this is just a passion I've had, and climbers found me. I didn't set out to work with climbers. So I
That's
think that's
interesting.
just really interesting.
And I wanted to, just slow you down for a minute there, if you don't mind. Yeah, because you're right, because it's the ranges of the emotional experience, even as you describe that, like I could imagine, is so intense. And we know that like some of the greatest parasympathetic identification with who you are and your joy comes from an experience of perhaps not having that, so when you describe that as a teenager, like going through that injury process, I'm wondering, have you found that to be similar for a lot of youth athletes, and what was available to you in terms of support to get through that process?
Yeah, I do find it very similar process, even in youth athletes, all the way to someone who's in their 50s, who's had like a professional athlete, a ultra runner that I know, who's had this like loss of identity in her 50s because of an injury. I'm like, wait, you're just going through that at 50? I went through that at 16. That's never happened to you before. Just kind of shocked, right? I forgot the second part of that question. You'll have to
Well,
remind me.
yeah, was if like, so when I hear you say it now, I mean, it's like a form of loss, or almost a grief, no matter what age you go through it. So I was wondering what was available to you as a resource in art, even up through professionals, like what's available to athletes when they go through injury to help them develop that other leg.
Nothing, unfortunately. Like, my experience has been really not a lot. So my personal experience, I didn't have any support. I supported myself. I had to figure it out, I journaled, I cried, I still went to practice. I mean, I had my teammates there, but they didn't really know what to do or say. My coaches really didn't know what to do or say. When I became an athletic trainer, there wasn't really any classes, become a board certified athletic trainer. There were no classes on like the psychological aspect. There might have been like, not a former class, like a sprinkling of classes in there about it. But because I had that injury, I was like, this is a huge part of this. And working at the collegiate level, I mean, you have the student resources, the counseling resources at the university. And so sometimes I would refer athletes there, but they're really like my voice is kind of shattering because I think my heart is like, oh my gosh, we need more
Sorry, I
help.
sent you deeper into stress mode. Okay, so let's bring you back up. So back to joy.
No, it's good, but it's something that's close to my heart,
yeah,
right? I think now in collegiate athletics, there are more sports psychologists. There is this need. As an athletic trainer, you are the primary care giver for these athletes, whether it's like they have a rash or it's a physical injury or whatever it is, but we're just not trained. Well, at least I wasn't. Now it's changing. I wasn't trained in that like mental health, psychological aspect.
So yeah, I guess the real question is about motivation. That it's fueled joy, but how much of that experience of seeing an absence of it has motivated you to then become the one who provides this? Particularly in a realm where, I mean, from what I'm experiencing, even though I'm assuming people climb in pairs and teams, there's a lot of time out there on your own as well.
Yeah. What was the question?
Okay, sorry. I have two or three, multiple choice. So yeah. How much of your fuel, the joy that you pursue, has been inspired through what you noticed as an absence of that presence?
100% comes through my experience, what experiences I've had, how I've been able to process them, make sense of them, make meaning of them. And I think that's part of the reason, like, why like my sports psychology business has grown is because of those experiences as an athlete, and I continue to do things. Today I have a funny goal of skiing every month since my 40th birthday, so it's like it was just supposed to be a year, but I've just kept going. It's been 22 months. And so just being able to have those experiences and connect with the athletes on a lot of different levels. So I think it's 100% experience. That's where my motivation comes from.
Yeah, and in my introduction, I may have failed to acknowledge the audience that you are an athlete as well, that primarily your connection to other athletes is that you pursue these sports yourself and the love of being outdoors. Some of that sounds like that theme has continued and maybe just been transferred to other sports now as an adult.
Yeah, definitely. Athlete is a loose term for me.
Okay.
I'm active on a daily basis. I'm not training for anything right now, but it's like, but I think that's an athlete, someone who is striving to be active on a daily basis. You don't have to be an extreme athlete and running Ironmans or whatever else. If you're just trying to be the best version of yourself, whatever that looks like today, like I've just birthed a baby, a business, and a book in the last 2 years. So
Amazing.
It's like my fitness is not really that great, but I'm doing what I can with what I have right now. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, that's very important. And how, important a message is that, especially for, women in the field of sport, right? How do they adjust to becoming mothers and businesswomen and still keeping their athletic identity?
I don't know. I think we have a conference because I'm still working on it. But really, I think it's prioritizing yourself. Like, I think mothers are just natural givers. And so, but in order to be joyful and excel, you really have to do things for yourself and have healthy boundaries around those things. So my favorite thing to do in the world is to go outside and just sit in nature and not do a dang thing. Like, do nothing. That is my favorite thing, and really trying to prioritize that.
Yeah, I mean, I know I've watched. There was a second movie. It's on Netflix now called The Dawn Wall. Have you seen that?
Mm-hmm.
And they did show kind of some of the experience of being with parents and just being taken out just to climb. Just to struggle to get over the 1 foot rock or the 2 foot rock, and how that kind of piques curiosity. In your experience,
I'll just add to that. I read Tommy Caldwell's book, The Push, which is the movie, and I actually reached out to him because in the book he mentioned his mother and how much his mom sacrificed for him and his dad to go out and climb. And I'm just like, oh man, she was such a huge part for you. You get all the glory, but she really is kind of a Sherpa. So I just want to recognize Tommy Caldwell's mom. Nice work. I don't know her, but good job.
Yeah, I think there was a lot that came out about what were some of the sacrifices she had to make? Or was she an athlete herself? There's something very unique about her.
Yeah, I don't know. I just, he didn't mention a whole lot, but just him and her dad go on adventures, right? And so he had a sister, and so someone needs to take care of those sisters, and I'm sure his mom didn't get to be able to go on all those adventures either. And so I don't know the specifics. I can't remember in the book. Yeah. But that was something that just touched my heart.
So read The Push or watch The Dawn Wall.
Yes.
So you were, before I cut you off earlier and sent you into deep panic state, we were talking about how the athletes, so Black Diamond, and then athletes started to find you. So that's a very powerful message for people trying to get into the field of sports psychology, about once you set out to a field and something that you're passionate about, other people, mentors, start to see you as a resource.
Yeah, definitely. I think what's the intention behind, if you want to pursue something like sports psychology or any avenue, whether it's music or whatever it is, what is the intention? Is it for because it's kind of glamorous to work, as a sports psychologist, and I never ever set out to work with professional athletes. I've always liked the collegiate age, the youth, just because their personal development and growth, and I like that in my elite athletes too. But I found it really interesting. I was like, well, what, my passion is really how do I help people build these extraordinary lives by empowering them to build the champion within. And that's just how it's evolved and things that I like to do versus I'm going to work with rock climbers because I rock climb and that's what I should be doing. And I know all this stuff. I'm like, I don't know crap. But I know how to listen and that's what I'm good at.
Yeah, right on to that. Yes. So how did you discover what the champion within is or what might work?
What? Say that again?
How did you discover your own inner champion? And then I'm assuming this has gone into your, the mindset, and the way you work with rock climbers or all athletes.
Yeah, well, the champion within is just this ongoing process for myself. And my philosophy is that peak performance comes from peak wellness. And there are 4 legs on that table: physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. And so that goes back to the days of an athletic trainer when the athlete only had that physical leg to stand on. And the other 3 legs they weren't paying as much attention to. And so when you're only on a 1-legged stool or 2-legged stool, it's pretty wobbly. And so how do we work on all of those legs? And that's what I feel like I do as a sports psychologist because I have that physical background as well. And so how do we work on all these legs versus like I'm really good at like my emotional leg is not very strong. I like to put like a cardboard box under there or just like put a rusty nail in it. It's going to be fine until it's not. And then I have to go to therapy. And that's just a conditioned response for myself, right? And so it's something that I'm working on. Like, oh, right, like there's this emotional leg that I have to remember to nurture. The other 3 legs I'm really pretty good at. And so, but everybody's different. So that's how I developed the champion within.
Yes, and I know at the conference you shared some videos of a particular team of climbers you work with, and some particular individuals that may be, a little bit hard on themselves or not as in tuned emotionally to empathy or connecting to others. How have you found your own journey and the 4 legs apply to that team?
Yeah, well, to that specific team, there were 3 climbers, and they came together, and it was called the Black Diamond Boot Camp. And they were trying to do a holistic approach to help them as climbers. And so they had 3 months of a coach training them, and so they went on different training cycles, and then they had a physical therapist come because some of them have injuries, especially fingers injuries as climbers, and so how do you take care of your body and recover? They also had a nutritionist come, like dialing in their nutrition. And so then I came in as the sports psychologist and I worked with them for a few days. The interesting part was they're on a low budget. So I actually flew to Colorado and actually stayed with them. So they were nice and I got my own room. So I stayed with the 3 guys, the 3 pro climbers. So that was a really interesting experience to see how they live together, how they train together and what's going on. Just like how they decided to do dishes, just those little things. I got to be a fly on the wall. Sometimes I would speak up, but it just kind of depended. But while I was there, I would just give them these little nuggets. Sometimes we would do it in the evening. Sometimes I'd have time in their training thing, and then I'd go on walks with each one of them individually. So it was pretty short time, but I would tell them, like, that's my philosophy. And that just made intuitive sense to them. And I mean, there's only so much you can do in 2 or 3 days. So, but a lot of those 3 guys, I've worked on with each of them on different levels since, and that was 4 years ago. So
sometimes initially being brought in to help a team opens up a dialogue or a trust where the athlete will reach out to you and say, I see that maybe there's another leg, I need enhancement, and that you might be a resource for me in doing that.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah, when I went to that, because I said that was the first time I had worked with pro climbers, so I was pretty nervous. I'm going to be living with them. I haven't worked with pro climbers before. I've worked with pro athletes, but not climbers. And so I had one goal when I was there, and that goal was to be myself.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, right? Because a lot of professionals stepping into the realm that they're not comfortable with, or like you said, moving up into the professional realm, there's going to be a little bit of performance anxiety that goes along with that. And so trying to figure out like what works, what can I bring to the situation to be authentic, what's needed of me. Like there's so many things happening. So it's impossible to have it all figured out, in this pursuit of like, being a professional, sports psychology professional.
But that was one thing that I could control, was being myself. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know how much time I would have. I really didn't know how it was going to be laid out. And so that also gave me like safety, because that was one thing I could control. And so I didn't have like an outcome strategy, or like a call to action if you're like in business and marketing. Like I didn't have any of that. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just gonna like be myself and give them what I have and just do the best I can. And so when they're driving to me to the airport, they started asking like, well, how do people work with you? Like, so I was like, oh, they want to work with me. Oh, oh, this is how it looks like. It looks like we do FaceTime or Skype or Zoom, whatever that is, whatever works for your schedule. And we do these, up to 15-minute sessions. I started telling them about it, and they're like, great. And then I was like, I'll follow up with each of you. So I did like I had them take an assessment before I went, and so I sent their assessments to them and what we talked about, and so like a 3 or 4 page like summary of what they should be working on. And then from there, each one of them reached out to me at different times. One immediately, one a year later. So
Yeah, so that's pretty interesting. So, how much do you find when teams or corporations reach out to you that they're kind of like they're not sure what they need and they allow you to just organically develop it, and how much of it is where they come in and they have like the strict plan? And do you prefer to remain in that space where it's yours to figure out and define?
yeah, my experience, most people have like maybe a goal, like say I'll just switch to marketing, a marketing team that I worked for, and they want to do some team building and performance. And it was like their goal was to be one unstoppable force. And I just have a conversation with them, and then I just use my intuition, and things just come up. Like, oh, how about we do something like this or that? And they're like, oh my gosh, that sounds great. I'm like, great, I'll put it together. And so I prefer that as well. Prefer like even our conversations before this, like, any topics you want to cover? I'm like, no, let's just let it grow organically. I like that. I like to see what comes up, versus sometimes I feel like a fraud if it's like, I have to talk about this and like, here's my PowerPoint. Like, oh my gosh, I want to poke my eyeballs out.
Yes, and I love that, by the way. It was such a gift. The kind of, I guess you call them, icebreakers before the training. Of course, it's kind of a joke, right? Getting a group of psychologists in a room together, and then like you kind of ask them, not to give away your presentation, but like, who organizes their closet by a certain thing, or like you kind of did a personality inventory and had people group themselves, and some people were just like completely stupefied as to why they were being asked these questions. But it got
That's
people.
really interesting, like from your perspective. So in that 90-minute presentation at the California Psychological Association, just to give the audience a little reference, I did something called ACE Your Performance, and ACE stands for Attitude, Concentration, Enjoyment. And so I had them do an icebreaker and get up and had a continuum line, and some questions I asked were like, when you get up in the morning, are you a fuzzy bunny or an angry Wolverine? Put yourself on the line. And people are like, what the hell is she doing?
Yeah, so I was like observing myself, observing others. It was a whole meta experience. But it's incredible, and that's why I say it's such a gift, because you brought yourself to the room, and clearly I'm not a fuzzy bunny in the morning. I can admit that to everyone. I'm working on it. But the fact that it gets people opening up and talking and thinking about themselves, and the ways in which they show up for the work, prior to even thinking about the attention on psychology. So how am I going to help the client? What assessment? What theory? What modality I'm going to use? Without taking a look at who are you right now, and who are you today, and what are you bringing, and what are you committed to bringing? And sometimes that means letting go of the modality or the treatment plan. That's not what probably assessment course and your PhD program will tell you. But it's like you have to have all this knowledge and training in order to be sometimes a blank slate to connect. The empathy piece, and I'm still amazed by those who can do it in front of large groups. How have you prepared yourself to be in front of rooms like that and trainings and made it more natural?
Mm-hmm. Well, I started teaching at a university at the age of 24. That's when I got right out of my master's degree. Had that split position of being an athletic trainer for most of the women's sports, and then the other half of my position was being a lecturer for athletic training courses. And I had done that during my master's degree, and I really enjoyed it, even though, I still have the same fear as everybody else as public speaking. I still have that. It's still there. But I just really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed teaching. I enjoyed, how do I understand this information? And then, how do I deconstruct it that makes it sense to me? And then make it fun and sticky, ace your performance, those types of things. And so it's just something that I've just done for myself. How do I navigate through this world and optimize my life? And I just think in those acronyms or fun ways. I also have a degree in experiential education. And so there's a company called Knowles, National Outdoor Leadership School. And I worked for them for 7 summers. So throughout my PhD even. And so those activities, those icebreakers, I learned a lot of those through Knowles, and they're not just icebreakers. You actually take a group of people through not knowing each other to performing, and so I learned that through experiential education and getting a degree. I did that while I was getting my PhD, so that was my cognate or minor, as well as going into the field and learning how to take a group of people that don't know each other and have them start, forming and norming, and then, storming and performing. And how do you do that through activity? So actually I have a degree in that.
Wow. What a valuable skill. I feel like we need to send all the urban people to Knowles. I mean, can you bring that around the country? I mean, just for organizations, that seems so valuable to get in a place of team building. You have to get into exercises together, and I know that's something that I bring out when I do work with basketball teams and things like that to get a sense of how are you communicating verbally and non-verbally, and building a little bit more trust. So tell us a little bit about Elevate Your Excellence. You mentioned you did this all in the last 2 years while being a mommy to a toddler now.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's fueled behind it, and is there a book tour? How are we gonna get access to the mindset path?
I'll talk about my book in 1 minute.
Sure.
I will talk about another book to piggyback on how do you take groups through to performing.
Yes.
There's a great book called The Processing Pinnacle, and it's an experiential education book, and it will show you what kind of questions you ask, how do you debrief somebody. It's not just how do you feel, right? That can be really off-putting, and you probably learn that in your program as a therapist, but it's just a different way or avenue of how do you do that with groups of people. And so just if anyone's out there, The Processing Pinnacle. I don't remember the author, but it's a great book.
Well, we'll post it in the notes. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My book, let's see, it's right here.
All right.
I got it right here.
Focus,
It's not very thick. It's like me. It's small, but has a big punch to it. I'm only 5'2", so on a good day. Yeah, so Elevate Your Excellence is actually a textbook. And it's meant to be a supplemental text. And it's meant for like coaches and athletes or parents who really enjoy science but also practical application. And so like that's what the book is based off of. Like, great, I have a PhD, I've done the research, but I also am a huge practitioner. Like, how do you apply this stuff? This is great in theory, but how do you apply? So if you're a mind who likes both, this is a great book for you. And it's part of a series. The editor of my book is Abigail Larson. She has a PhD in exercise physiology. She's a registered dietitian, and she is an Olympian in cross-country skiing, in skate skiing, and she's the editor of my book. And so she's the one that drew me in, and she wrote a book, Fuel for Sport. So my book is under an umbrella of just like, what are books that are quick and easy, that have science and practical application that a coach or athlete can pick up and learn about sports psychology, athletic training. Hers is nutrition, so Fuel for Sport. So it's part of a series.
Incredible. Yeah, and I know they're trying to do a lot of standardization of the material learned in sports psychology programs, so hopefully they will adapt it as a text.
Mm-hmm.
One question that's come up, just to change gears for a minute, in going back to the free solo and things like that, and from some of our listeners is, there's this amazing freedom in playing outside, and yet clearly in the free solo, the perspective of like the risk is evident and highlighted. Is it at all the work of a sports psychologist to address excessive risk taking? I mean, how, I know they did a little bit of a highlight of a brain scan they took, that there's less inhibition. How much of your work focuses on the one hand, engaging this like free spirit and adventure and risk taking, and the other hand, that important principle and leg of safety?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So the type of athletes that are attracted to climbing or say big mountain skiing, things like that, people kind of like me, I think we are also intuitive people. And so a lot of my work is having people listen to their intuition as well. Like, things aren't good or bad or right or wrong. It's like, when you have that negative thought or feeling that comes up, like, oh my gosh, I can't do this. Like, that's a real thing. Like, your brain is trying to keep you safe. And there's the fine line in sports that I work with, like, should you do it or should you not do it? Like, when the hair stand up on the back of your neck, like, you should listen to that and you should bail. And so I'm not there. They don't have a headset in their ear to tell them what to do. And so I teach them to listen to those things and assess those things and back off, and how much of their ego is involved, or the camera is there, or whatever it is. And then I myself think about that a lot. Like, I had a friend who died of a heart attack at her desk. She had 2 little ones, and I've had lots of friends who've had crazy things that have died with little ones at home.
Mm-hmm.
And so I actually I emailed the senior sports psychologist in Colorado, Sean McCann, and I was like, hey, I have this, right after my friend died, I have this athlete who wants to not free solo, but solo, so use a rope, but just herself, up on El Cap. And so I'm like, I don't know if I can help her. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. I shouldn't be in this profession. People freaking die. Like, what the hell am I doing? And so, like, I'll reach out to resources and be like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? Okay, how do I help people? So I go through these struggles too. I mean, I've had 2 clients die, neither of them from none of them from climbing or their sport, but from other things. And so those are things that I like really think about and take really seriously.
Yeah, that's an important point there. The vicarious responsibility in holding that space for the risk that's being taken by these athletes. And thank you for that transparency. Where do you? Yeah, you mentioned others in the field, but where do you get that support now? Because as you step out there and you work with more and more elite athletes, it is a lot of responsibility to take on as well.
Well, I have 2 therapists. I do. I have one for my professional life and one for my personal life. I really do. And so I have, my professional therapist that I go see, and we talk about these things and we analyze these things. And I'm like, should I be referring them? What should I do? And so that's where I find the support is I just go see a professional and I talk about them and get their opinion, and I journal about things. I meditate on things. I have a a tool that I use that is a gut tool, and here in my small town of One Stoplight, I have a nickname, and it's Bubbles, because of my personality. and
nickname.
So like this is called the Dr. Bubbles Ouija board. And so what I do when I'm stuck is I just get really still and I get quiet and I close my eyes and I take a breath and then I ask myself a yes or no question concerning what's going on. And so what I do is I imagine a needle in the middle, and on one side is yes and on the other side is no, and I ask the question and I watch the needle go. Sometimes it doesn't move, sometimes I'm not ready, sometimes the needle, like I asked this when I was pregnant, I'm like, am I pregnant? It went boom. It's like, yes, you are. Like, okay, I think I'm pregnant. And I was. And so it might sound like a woo-woo voodoo thing, but intuition is really strong. They've done studies on that. And so that's another like personal resource that I use.
Well,
and then I reach out to people.
Yeah, the permission to both get support and get quiet inside and listen to oneself. And it sounds like the Ouija board is we use visualization, right? Any way to see somehow, right, to separate the different noises or voices inside of us pulling us in both directions, right? And it sounds like, right, to separate from our clients and be sure that we're not just telling them what they want to hear or not keeping quiet when we need to kind of reflect something that's happening that could be risky or something else that we feel is motivating them that may not be from a healthy place. We have to have trust.
Yeah, that's a really big thing is like trusting in yourself, right? That's huge. Like for the athletes that I work with and myself, like there's things that I've said to clients. I'm like, I can't believe that just came out of my mouth, but that's what needed to be said. And I'm like, they're never going to call me back. And they do, because those are things that they're like, yeah, you're right. Those are things that I need to hear. And so I also need to be in that seat. That's why I personally go to therapy and also professionally. Like I need to be in that seat too. That's how I'm learning and growing and trusting myself.
Yes. Thank you for being so honest about that. For any therapists or people in this field, I know they kind of require it when you're in graduate school and it feels like it's homework or something, another to-do list. But the importance of putting the mask on yourself first from the airplane oxygen metaphor is so vital. The longer I work with different populations and even doing work that's in your passion, there has to be someone who's taking care of you as well. None of us can hold everything or anticipate every challenging scenario that we might face in practice in whatever realm you choose. So being open to exploring your resistance to that, or finding someone who you just helps you process differently and with safety, I encourage you to go on that journey. So on a funner note, other Olympic sports besides climbing, gaming is coming onto the forefront, right? People are it's certainly on the forefront in my home. So what can you tell us about those shifts that are happening and your interest in that area?
Well, that is news to me. So obviously, I don't have a high interest in gaming. My son does. He's starting. He's 5 now, so he's starting that world. Minecraft is like, when can I buy a computer for Minecraft? We just go to the library, so we have healthy boundaries. When we're at the library, you can play Minecraft, or else he'd be on it all day. So I'm not sure. I don't really have an opinion on that because I'm not in that world. But it's really fascinating now that you say that. It's like, because that seems intellectual to me more than I see Olympics as a physical and mental realm together.
Right.
Like chess isn't in the Olympics, right? Chess is not in the Olympics.
I don't think so. No. So it is this, right? It is this new realm of like, right? What is a sport? I know I ask my students in sports psychology all the time about frisbee, like what would classified as a sport, and if but this is a lot different, right? But there's competitive teams. Apparently, there's e-gaming for the NBA. There's teams now, I think, sponsored by basketball teams that play in teams, and so and we've even had on our show the Gamers Doc, Levi Harrison, who works with exercises to keep your hands and eyes limber from sitting so much, including the kind of preventative mental skills to stay focused and to make sure you're balancing out your life.
So maybe they need to have, those treadmills, the walking treadmills when you're working, because, when you're walking, you get into those like lower alpha wave states, so you actually think better and concentrate better. So maybe they can walk and game at the same time to improve like their concentration, their performance, and their like body health. Maybe that's an idea.
You see, this could be an area of expertise. We'll just get a whole gamers team on bikes and see how well you perform while biking a marathon.
Right. And I'm not like, gaming has done a lot. Like my brother is a huge gamer, so I'm not like dissing gaming by any means. It's just really interesting that it's chosen to be an Olympic sport. And I'm just trying to wrap my head around that.
Sorry, we threw a curveball at you, but it is in process as we speak. So tell us before closing, Dr. Christina, I know we're going to continue our discussion and trying to bring a webinar for students out there, and I thank you so much for your openness, your passion, your excitement, and embodiment of what it means to be a professional in this realm. It is inspiring for me. I hope you accept that gratitude and appreciation and inspiration got from your presence at the conference. I know it must not have been easy to leave the young man at home with his Minecraft to come present to us.
It was easy.
Tell us how people can reach you and find you, and anything you want to share in closing.
Yeah, people could find me on my website, which is www.mindset-coach.com. I have a newsletter. I maybe do it once a month, so I won't bombard your inbox with a bunch of things. I just write it when I'm inspired. So it's actually something coming from my heart, so I don't have like, oh, I write a monthly newsletter. It's just whenever I like feel like it, because I tried the monthly thing and then it felt like torture because of my just natural organic process that just seems to work for me. I also on Instagram, and my handle is at Mindset Doctor, so at Mindset DR. So you can get a hold of me in any of those ways.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for being here, for expanding our minds into not only the ways to work with sports maybe that are less common in cities, but are becoming certainly more familiar on the national landscape, and certainly ones which explore nature, push your limits in ways that maybe team sports athletes are not familiar with, and face risks and fears in entirely different ways, and for sharing your journey and how your evolution and passion towards joy has led you to that place to be of service. So thank you for being here. I hope everyone will pick up a copy of Elevate Your Excellence, or the other text you mentioned, the other book you wrote.
I didn't write the book, but it's called The Processing Pinnacle.
Processing Pinnacle. So we'll share both of those. Check out Dr. Christina at themindsetcoach.com. In closing, I want to thank our crew and cast here. As always, you can find us, Richard Listens Instagram at Richard Listens, Twitter, we're stepping into that realm as well, and Facebook/Richard Listens, where you can normally watch this show as well as other ones live. This one will be released. It's a pre-record, and we hope you'll stay tuned and stay in touch with us. Please keep sharing with us. Who do you want to hear from? Who are examples of performers, stories, journeys that you'd like to learn more about? What are the topics that you have questions or concerns about, including things going on, unpopular or unhappy things like the violence we've experienced on a mass level? We're not afraid to engage it and share resources, as well as topics like grief and loss. So thank you all for listening, tuning in, being our audience. We'll be back in a couple weeks. We're going to have Mr. Yuta Ricardo, Society of Youth Entrepreneurs, so representing those young 16 to 25 demographic and how they are looking to change the world. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and we're out. Thank you.